Genesis 1 declares that on the fourth day of creation, God created lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and God let them be for signs and seasons and days and years. For his fourth sign in the Gospel of John, Jesus fed a multitude of 5,000 people using just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and still 12 baskets of food were left over. Before we look at Valentin Tomberg's assessment of these two events, I want to consider the symbolic nature of the days of creation. This is not an issue of ancient humans not understanding the so-called objective reality of the world, at least not exclusively. It has nothing to do with the fact that the sun and stars are spheres of burning gas, or of their incomprehensible size and distance. Instead, it is about our relationship to the sun, moon, and stars, both externally and internally, what they are and what they represent in the world. Our consciousness is distorted by the fall, by separation from unity, and the descent into multiplicity and opposition that is represented by the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In other words, our relationship with God is broken, and this greatly alters our experience of the world, whether occurring in the history of humanity or over the course of our own individual lives, as it inevitably does. This poison has entered the stream and contaminated everything that we experience. In one of his earlier anthroposophical books called Christ and Sophia, Valentin Tomberg describes the healing purpose of the 7 miracles in the Gospel of John. The 7 miracles recorded in John's Gospel represent the healing of the 7 principal infirmities of human nature in both individuals and groups. The mystery of Golgotha, however, transferred the fruits of the healings to humanity as a whole. So we are dealing with far more in the fourth day of creation than the appearance of the sun, moon, and stars in the sky. And with the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus is accomplishing far more than feeding a hungry multitude. These miracles are not meant to be magic tricks or demonstrations that display some portion of his godlike abilities. Instead, they are the absolute fullness of his purpose being acted out in the world. He is accomplishing in these miracles exactly what he set out to do. He is not only feeding a multitude, but is simultaneously healing the broken world, realigning it with the perfection established on the days of creation and lost during the fall. The fourth day of creation is the genesis of that all-embracing world rhythm, in which all beings partake and that unifies them into a world-embracing community. Consider by way of analogy human consciousness. It does not become chaotic through the strife of wishes, desires, whims, moods, notions, and countless impulses from without and within, from fantasy and from memory. Rather, it arranges itself around a central point, the self, which represents the center of gravity of the soul life, the permanency of the identity of the personality. He continues, moreover, aided by the light of reason, it works in such a way as to bring order even into the night of the subconscious, leading the whole soul life, conscious and unconscious, or day and night, in the direction of the ideals. Ideals can be likened to stars, enabling orientation and pointing the way. Analogously, in the macrocosm, there is an active midpoint, a center, a sun, which radiates forth light, warmth, and life, representing the community-building principle of the awake world of day, while its reflected light, moon, is the community-building principle of the unconscious, sleeping world of night. This sun leads and supports the whole, the day world, and also the night world, in harmony with the world of stars. For as the sun, raying out light, warmth, and life, nourishes all beings and unites them in a community of nourishment, so Jesus Christ functioned at the feeding of the 5,000 as the nourishment-giving center for the 5,000. He carried out during the short time of the feeding what the sun effects in the course of the year, when it brings about a multiplication of bread through the sprouting, growth, and ripening of corn. For there takes place yearly on earth a multiplication of bread effected through the power of the sun, so that the small amount of corn that is sown multiplies tenfold. And as the moon, reflecting the light of the sun, tones down the light and passing it on, so did the disciples who were with him on the mountain, as they received from Jesus the bread that he had blessed and passed it on to the people gathered there. They distributed it, that is, they toned down the creative stream of augmentation by handing it out in portions. The disciples received and passed on the blessed Eucharistic bread, just as the moon receives and passes on the light of the sun in a dimmed, toned-down form. When one is talking of the effect of light, dimmed and toned down means not too dazzling, and when one is talking in terms of potency, it means bearable. This mediating effect of the moon, which transforms the boundless, streaming strength of the sun, such that it becomes more individually acceptable, can also be understood in relation to the experience of the sacrament of Holy Communion received at the altar. As for the 12 baskets that were left over, Tomberg goes on to say that not only did Jesus act as the life-giving sun in multiplying the bread, with his disciples acting as the reflecting power of the moon and toning down the strength of the sun and distributing it to the multitude, but that the multitude itself also became multipliers by becoming individual sources of light, or stars. The miracle was still more wonderful than merely feeding the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. It comprised also an active, miracle-working participation of all the 5,000 people who took part in the miracle. They all, and each of them separately, also became bread multipliers within their individual boundaries. They became, in themselves, individual sources of light. By this we are saying that the 5,000 not only received the miraculously increased nourishment, but also the multiplying power, I am the bread of life, into themselves. Or rather, they experienced it springing up within them. They became, within their individual boundaries, like Christ, bread multipliers, becoming creative founts of life-giving light. The Christ, who before the distribution of loaves was on the mountain external to them, was now actively present in them.